then I'll wait until we do the introductions before I pull up the agenda, because that way we can all see each other, which is nice. And then once the agenda is up, it'll be a little bit harder. So I'm just gonna, does somebody want to, I guess I'll start with the introductions, and then whoever wants to go next can. So my name is Nicole Gerling. I am the data analyst lead for the Connect cohort. This is a relatively new cohort. We launched about 2.5 years ago. We're recruiting 200,000 participants over the course of 6 years. And we're actually recently expanding our age range from 30 to 70. So our goal is to look at the etiology of cancer, and then following that, treatments and early diagnosis and things like that. We're doing it through a number of instruments, of course, including surveys. So we currently have a baseline survey that's taken at the beginning of the study that consists of 4 modules. We have other surveys that are taken with blood work relative to menstruation. We're going to be starting the PROMISE survey, which is a quality of life survey. And then we will have follow-up surveys to the baseline, and additional surveys that are shared out after cancer diagnosis, and of course others that are in development, including participant satisfaction. So my interest, I started sort of stalking, for lack of a better word, OMOP about 3 or 4 years ago, when I first started with, actually, I guess 4 years ago, when I first started with Connect. And the National Libraries of Medicine had hosted a workshop on different data models, and I was really impressed with what OMOP was doing, and have kind of been attending community calls and getting to meet people within that system since then, hoping to be prepared for when Connect starts getting data. So I've spent about a year going to the CDM working group models. Claire Blacketer is the lead for that group, and discussed with her having a survey working group, which is something they've been wanting to have for a long time, to help build out a survey expansion tables. So there are a number of other groups have done some work in surveys, but it hasn't been done in a holistic, this is how we're going to do surveys for OMOP. A lot of the work that's been done to date, which I guess I'm skipping ahead a little bit in my introduction, but are more one-off sorts of things. And so we're kind of wanting to come together and actually help OMOP have tables that will help others map surveys and do it in a more consistent way across studies. So that's my interest. I admit my experience is limited. Like I said, we didn't have data when I started OMOP, so I've mostly been watching. So I am certainly interested in hearing your others' experience, and we'll be doing some investigating on my own. And of course, others are welcome to join in understanding, how best we can move this process forward. So if, Katie, I'm just going to start with you because you're on my screen next, but you just introduce yourself, what you work with, and what your sort of interest and experience is with OMOP or surveys.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Katie O'Brien. I'm a staff scientist at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, although I actually live in Rockville, Maryland, so you may see me around campus there. So I am the staff scientist for the SISTER study, which is an ongoing cohort out of NIEHS, 50,000 women across the United States. I'm also working on some of the Connect questionnaires and subcommittees there. And then I have experience with some of the consortia, premenopausal breast cancer collaborative group, and the OC3 ovarian cancer. And so it was actually OC3 that asked me to join up with this group. We've done a lot of work recently on harmonization, especially harmonization of time varying covariates, and trying to get that all ironed out to the extent that you can. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Katie. Tom, you're next on my screen. So
Hi, everybody. Tom Ahern. I'm a staff scientist also, like Katie and Nicole. I'm at the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics in Rockville. So my sort of interest in this group, I've been working a lot within the Confluence project, which many of you are participating in, as well as the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project. So there's been many discussions of data models and harmonization within these projects. Also working with Nicole and others on the very early days of the population data science repository that NIH is looking to eventually stand up. So data models and harmonization is always a very hot topic in those meetings. So, nice to see everybody.
Thanks, Tom. Mansi?
Okay. Hello. So here's my main interest in the group is very related to what we just heard. So I was the former PI of the Connect study. So we started a lot of discussions with Nicole in terms of the creation of the a database that could be interoperable both within the study and across other studies, as well as working with Tom and the Confluence of the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project. And now I'm the PI of the Generations cohort in London, where we are going through also data reorganization to make it more interoperable as well. So in a sense, it's working with both. I think we are all have these experiences, individual cohorts that have historical data, new cohorts that we had we're lucky enough to start from scratch, as well as consortia projects like the OC3 and the other two Confluence and Breast Cancer Expedition projects. I think these are very good sort of combination of types of studies that we will all benefit from the more standardization.
Thanks, Mansi. And James, or do you prefer Jim? I'm sorry, I wasn't sure.
Morning. Jim is what most people call me. Thanks.
Okay, there we go. Thanks.
Yeah. Good morning. It's good to see everyone. I think I know most of you on the call. I'm calling from Los Angeles, California, where I am one of the PIs of the California Teacher Study. And why I'm interested in this, about 10 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long, we started doing what Mansi just mentioned and replaced our old data methods with a data warehouse and kind of a very, very early version of the data commons. And I remember one of the early discussions with our data architect, our architect for the warehouse, and he said, "What kind of data model do you want to use?" And I said, "What kind of what?" And in the discussions with our NCI funding staff over at DCCPS over the years, they would ask, well, Jim, what can we do to get other cohorts to adopt the tools you're using and replicate what you've done with the teacher study? And I said, simple, give them funding and insist everybody use a common data model. So when I heard this discussion come up, I thought this is great. It's going to enable a lot more interoperability. We've been looking for an opportunity. I've put it in a couple grants that would include funding to map our current CTS model to OMOP Odyssey. And I have to say that it has fallen on completely deaf ears for reviewers and for program staff. And so I like the idea of doing this together. And it's something I'd also mentioned in the core consortium steering committee, where I'm still on the steering committee. So anything we do here, I think we'd find probably a very willing partner in the steering committee and the core consortium community. So I'm very happy to be joining you all.
That's terrific. Thank you, Jim. Brandy, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandy Mapes. I'm a research director at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And I came to this group through way of Tamara, who's also on the call. At Vanderbilt, we also host the All of Us Data and Research Center. So for all of the research program, I've worked with survey methods and data standardization projects, both locally and through consortia, including All of Us. And within All of Us, we are currently using the OMOP data model to store concepts from our surveys for researchers.
Thanks, Brandy. And yeah, I guess I should wait until the Q&A, but I guess I'm a little, I'm interested in what you've been doing with that so far. But we'll go ahead and finish the introductions first. So Michael, you're next.
Hi, I'm Michael Cook. I think I know a lot of people on the call. I was previously at US National Cancer Institute with Jim, Monty, others, Nicole, and but a few years ago I came back to the UK, to England, to set up a new cohort called Our Future Health, and this is funded by the UK government, by industry, and by charities. And our aim is to try and recruit 5 million people, adult residents across the UK, prospective cohort with bank plasma, DNA, Buffy code. We have a similar questionnaire that is aligned somewhat with UK Biobank, with Connect, with all of us. And we haven't decided on sort of a formal international CDM yet, but OMOP has obviously been in our sights, and we are also going to be involved in a UK-based working group, part of HDR UK. HDR UK brings a lot of different academic, actually now commercial and charity groups together, and they also have an OMOP group, but it's not focused on new tables or surveys, as I think this group is. But we've been recruiting over the last 16 months here, Our Future Health, Magda and I, working with many others in our teams. Things are going very well, but we're very interested in trying to make sure that our data are in a format, or can be offered as in a format that is easily accessible to all different kinds of researchers across the globe. So we look forward to these conversations. We don't know what time we'll always have these meetings, but if they're at this time or even an hour later, we could probably, Magda or I can probably make them and at least give you our perspective on things. But I think we're very much in listening mode to see in particular what the US-based cohorts are moving towards, and whether OMOP is going to be adopted by all, and also whether we are going to form this sort of a survey set of tables for OMOP standardization. So nice to see you all. And maybe I can hand over to Magda, Nicole, to introduce herself.
Sure.
Yep. Hi, everyone. So I'm Magda, Head of Data Engineering at Our Future Health, so working very closely with Michael. But yeah, just here to listen, essentially. I've worked with OMOP before, so looking forward to these discussions. Thanks.
I think, Tamara, that leaves you.
Yeah, that leaves me. I'm Tamara Lidwin, also formerly of DCEG. It's amazing how many of us passed through that institution. I'm an epidemiologist at the LMS Research Program in the NIH Office of the Director. And we, as Brandy mentioned, we do transform all of our survey data into OMOP in sort of custom extension tables before they are released to researchers. And she is much more knowledgeable on the technical side of how we do that. And among many other roles, I am on our survey committee. So I am very related into like what survey questions we use to assess our participants, and very interested in how to best present those to researchers in a way that is understandable and also is easier to harmonize with other cohorts, and looking at repeat questions. I'm very interested in longitudinal data. If you ask the same question twice, how does that get displayed to researchers? And then also variables which can come from either the EHR or the participant, what we call participant provided information. So things like personal health history. I think beyond the sort of custom tables that we currently do, OMOP could really help create a framework for understanding how, for researchers to understand the provenance of a particular variable, but also find both versions of that somehow in the same manner in this hierarchical structure. So I'm not an expert in OMOP. That's why I asked Brandy to join us today. But I am really interested in how we can work together as some of the leading cohorts in the world to make OMOP a useful structure for survey data, and particularly for cohorts that also have other forms of data, such as the traditional EHR that are, OMOP's traditional data type.
Thanks, Tamara. And that's a really good point about having multiple types. Connect has the EHR as well. As I mentioned, many of these studies represented here do. And again, it's also one of the challenges for OMOP and probably why this hasn't been taken on in a more holistic way so far. So let me go ahead and share the agenda. And what I will probably do, I'm not good at both talking and taking notes. So I'll probably go back and look at the transcript or watch this again to populate, but I'll go and pull this up so we can kind of, so hopefully this is showing, there we go. All right, so I just highlighted everyone who's here, just so we have a record of who's present. This is just to remind me to record the meetings, so we have that for reference. We did the introduction. So I don't have a detailed status, but just sort of some things that are going on that I wanted everyone to be aware of. There is a presentation. I forward you all the invite. And of course, if you think there's somebody else who should see it, please feel free to do so. There is another group that has been working on survey issues, but again, just sort of one-off within their own studies, who are proposing a new variable to the common data model group. So the proposal is going to be presented at tomorrow's standing meeting, and basically what they're presenting is, again, a variable that sort of helps with the provenance of the questions. And so, but they also give a nice, I was on an earlier meeting when they were prepping for this, they also give a very nice sort of introduction as to some of the challenges in working with survey data and OMOP. And I think some of the work they're doing could help be a jumping off point for what we've done. So a lot of the work that seems to me need to be done is within the areas of vocabulary and just not having a complete vocabulary for describing all the possible answers to these very, very common survey questions, just not having the kind of resolution that's needed. So if you're available to attend that meeting, I think it would be helpful. If not, they record all of their meetings. And so you can also go back and take a look at it at your convenience. So other survey work, I think now would be a good time maybe to hear a little bit more about what all of us has been doing. But on my end, I just mostly wanted to note that this isn't original in the sense of people trying to work with survey data and with OMOP. And a lot of what's been done so far is just trying to make the vocabularies that are available for things like EHR and claims data work for survey data. So there's some other work out there. There's some investigating to be done, or some other individuals to invite to maybe present on what they've tried to do. But our group is really the first group that's trying to take a more holistic approach and making it applicable to more than one or two studies that are trying to do this at a time. But I would like to hear a little bit more from Brandy about how all of us has been doing this to date. Is it just assignment of, concept IDs, or has there actually been mapping already done as part of this process?
Yeah, so there is mapping. So back in the beginning stages of the program, we really saw survey data as something. Surveys were meant to augment or complement data that were able to capture passive leads from passively on behalf of participant. So we thought that OMOP would make a lot of sense just because we are already using that data model to store EHR data. So as Tamara was saying, in cases where maybe personal or family health history, using a standard concept, they'd be able to pull regardless of the source, as long as we had it. So what we've been doing to date is we've actually been managing all of us specific vocabulary that we store within the observation table of OMOP. So that vocabulary actually doesn't just include self-reported survey data. We're also using that vocabulary to store physical measurements data that we capture in clinic visits. That is stored in the same vocabulary, but in the measurement table. So we actually at Vanderbilt and all of us, the data center, we contract with Odysseus, which is a data services provider through Odyssey. And so the first step that we do is we have a regular survey data dictionary or code book. We're creating what in OMOP is referred to as those source variables. We have the structure. We pass that over to Odysseus. We work together on the actual mapping. So they take our source variables. They will actually go through and figure out what can be mapped to something standard. In cases where something can't be mapped to standard, which honestly is a large portion of it, they're just using the source to create a standard. And then they're also mapping just in terms of the actual hierarchy of the survey. So we'll have our module name, our sections or topics, our questions and answers. I think right now what we do see in terms of like those standard or mappings, personal family health, that's not been so much an issue. There's a standard there. Where we have a standard otherwise, it's typically something like from the LOINC vocabulary, something observational, but there's just not very much. And then where we are right now is we have historically taken, there's a couple of ways you can coordinate or actually handle the vocabulary. There's a pre and post coordinated. We've been taking one approach and we're starting to evaluate another. We've heard some feedback that I think maybe, for example, UK Biobank is taking one. So we are starting to look to see where we're not necessarily adhering to like some standard or where we really just don't have standards. We're trying to create some. That's where we are. I'm happy I can put a link in the chat so you all can actually see the vocabulary. This is a lesson learned. We named the vocabulary PPI instead of all of us. So you can't really tell it's all of us at the moment, but I'll put the link for that.
Thanks, Brandy. I was just going to ask you to do that. And is this something you have in GitHub or a wiki, or where are you keeping like the documentation and the tables and things?
So we do have a GitHub repository that has a lot of information about like our the process that we use to run our vocabulary mappings. I can find the link and put that there. For researchers, we have some researcher-facing codebook files. This is just like what the actual source or the original variables would look like. But I would say I think this is a gap right now in terms of looking from the original data dictionary, which most survey or social behavioral researchers want, to OMOP, which I think a lot of informatics or clinical researchers are just going right there. I can put some resources there, but I would say documentation is sort of created on a research interest right now. Yep, Tamara.
Yeah, I would just add that within all of us, so all of us data are accessed via cloud workbench using Jupyter notebooks, and researchers there's actually a GUI, there's like a graphical user interface way for researchers to pull variables. They don't have to sort of go into a blank Jupyter notebook and query the tables, and that interface enables them to search by either OMOP codes, LOINC codes, things like that, or using natural language, so that a researcher could search for variables related to depression, and they would pull up everything related to our survey, our mental health surveys, and also things that come from the EHR. So there is kind of a way for researchers to query both of those things at the same time. Is that right, Brandy? Anything to add?
Yeah, they can use the standard concept if they're working in the data, like they're querying directly, or we do have click and point tools that would allow them to do that on behalf of them.
That's great. Yeah, that's exciting that's where you are. And again, things that are going on that we can potentially build off of, because I'm a huge fan of not reinventing the wheel, just hopefully adding more spokes and getting it on the bike and we can use it. So I appreciate that. Is there anything else, other work that others are aware of surveys being mapped to OMOP that's either part of their project or you're aware of that you want to add to this discussion? And then we can kind of start talking about what we can do from there.
I suppose I just had one question for Brandy. Is you mentioned UK Biobank, and they obviously had there was a paper on OMOPing of the UK Biobank resource. Have you done like concept mapping between what you termed the All of Us concepts with what UK Biobank did, or did they mainly use sort of standardized terms already? And it would just be good to have an idea about how much of that mapping has been done, if any. You on mute, Brandy.
Oh, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me now?
Yeah, you can hear you now.
Yes.
We're not necessarily mapping to a UK Biobank concept as in their vocabulary as a standard. So I do believe that UK Biobank has its own vocab within OMOP. In some cases, we're mapping to the same standard. So for something like household income, there might be a standard LOINC code. So you would have the source concept from AOU, the source concept from UK Biobank, but that standard could be theoretically the same. I think that's one example, though, where we have historically used a post-coordinated approach to handling our concepts, and they're using a pre-coordinated approach. We've talked a little bit with Odysseus about that, just to figure out how we can better align, because I think right now they're one of the only other groups I know of that's using OMOP to store such a complete survey vocabulary.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Yeah, and I think that's what Nicole's trying to do here, right? Is trying to do like a bit of pre-coordination rather than post. But yeah, I suppose I was a bit interested in just how your vocabulary, whether it was already sort of mapped to theirs, but if they're using all sort of standard, I mean, it might be worth having or trying to have UK Biobank in this space if they're the other big player that's really already in the depths of this. But maybe that's a discussion for another day.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to do that today, but I do think that's one of the places we're going. And I think one of the things, so that if you've ever spent any time in the Odyssey forums, there's a lot of one-off and on and off conversations about surveys, but it might add this to an action item for me, is to just post and see what others are aware of. So we've got All of Us, we've got Biobank. Are there other surveys that have gotten to this point in terms of matching up vocabulary, and use those as building blocks, and then use them as building blocks and go from there, so that we can have the range of vocabulary that's really needed to describe the surveys and what things are captured as participant reported that aren't captured or captured differently for things like the EMR data. Anything else before we move on to the OKRs?
Nicole, I had a quick question. I put in the chat as well. Magda, I noticed the link there, and I'm bringing up this question because I think it might be related to the subsequent discussion of OKRs. Is that Athena AWS, or is it something specific to the group you mentioned, Odysseus?
Oh, I
Sorry,
think I put
I was about to
link
say
in
it's
the
not
chat.
me who put the link. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this is specific to Odyssey. So the community group that actually manages the OMOP Common Data Model, that's a repository of all concepts and vocabularies that are stored or accessible through OMOP. And I put the direct link there where you can find the All of Us vocab for survey concepts.
So that's not necessarily part of Athena yet, right? It's just you've kind of set it up in a similar way.
It's in Athena. So the
okay.
All of Us concepts are searchable publicly.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Can I just clarify, because I think this is what you said, but like the PPI vocab is only specific to All of Us, like that it doesn't include any other studies or initiative.
That's right. Yeah. So I can provide a little more detail. So yes. So in order for us to leverage OMOP and actually use that for our mapping and for storing our concepts, we needed to create a vocabulary that was specific to our program. So we go through Odysseus, which is the consulting services provider for Odyssey, to maintain our vocabulary. So PPI, we should have named it, all of us, and I think I've brought this up, maybe we're going to rename it soon, but PPI refers to only all of us created concepts. So in Athena, that's the online browsable repository of all concepts that are housed or managed by OMOP. And you can look at each table. So, you might have a observation table, a measurement table. There's many tables that support the EHR domains. The PPI vocabulary, that's housed in two tables: the observation table, which is where all of our survey data is, and the measurement table. So if there's any physical measurements that we collect through clinic visits, it's in the PPI vocabulary, but it's actually stored in the measurement table. So in PPI, I think if you're actually looking at that page, you can browse and you can see the class of the code. So that would be whether that's an answer, a question, a module name. I will mention something interesting about class, because I think someone just asked about the UK Biobank. I've seen a few cases, including in our own vocab, but a couple of other instances, like from NHANES variables that are in OMOP, where they're using a source, I think it's called source code, or it's a class of codes known as source, and that's where you can tie two projects together. So if our question is, how old are you? And we pulled that from UK Biobank, you could see the UK Biobank version of that in the source. It's just not used as a standard. But I hope that's helpful. And I'm happy to go over or prepare some documentation for a future call that gets into a little bit more of it.
Yeah, perhaps I don't want to divert too much, but I'd be curious to understand what was the process on, like, did you need to get approval to put it in Athena? Just wondering, maybe for another time, but I'm just curious to understand what the process was.
We did. So we had to go through Odyssey, get approval. Once we have that approval, in order to actually have that vocabulary maintained, we need to work with their data services provider.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
And is your vocabulary, so it's in Athena, you've had approval to do it. Is your vocabulary in the 5.4 data model then? Are they separate tables still?
In the data model. Now
Okay.
this, you might want to, if you email me, I can get a little more information, because I'm definitely not the one who's running our ETL and can tell you, but we're using the latest version of OMOP and it is in there.
Okay. Thank you. Helpful.
So a quick question. When you created these concepts, if you didn't worry about whether there was any other concept that could be mapped to, so you did that as, you want to do that as a post coordination, is that what you meant? So if you have a family history and you created a concept that's specific to all of us, if there was one that was already in whatever that was created in Loing or whatever, another vocabulary, you didn't bother about
That's
that.
right.
You will link it later. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. We're just handling it the same way. So for example, in the EHR, you might have an ICD code that's local, but that's mapped to something standard. And we're doing the same thing with surveys. We'll have a source code that's local to all of us, and then where it can be mapped to something standard, like Loink, it is.
Yeah. So you've gone through the process of trying to map to Loink, no, or some other, any other existing concepts in Athena.
We don't do that when we're creating the initial data dictionary for launching a survey. The initial variable we create in the data dictionary is the source. And then in order to get this uploaded into OMOP, that's where the mapping to a standard happens.
Okay, so you've gone through that process already of mapping. Okay. And that should be in the Athena when I query that. When I query concept ID, there will be the mapping information there.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy. Really happy you're on this call. This is very helpful, and I do suspect we will be asking you to present at a upcoming meeting. Um, any other questions, discussion before we start talking about the objectives and key results? All right, so we'll go ahead and I just marked discussion. I don't expect that we'll decide these today, but wanted to give a little bit of background about what they are and what kinds of things we might think of including in the objectives and key results. So every working group that is part of Odyssey has annual objectives and key results. And these are basically a format for stating the goals for that year, what they want to be able to accomplish as a working group. I believe, I don't remember the dates. They're doing phenotype February this month. So I'm not sure if I don't think they've already gone through this yet, maybe at the end of the month. But each working group then joins the community call and presents these OKRs. We won't necessarily need to do this. We're starting a little bit late relative to established groups and putting out these objectives. And we're also under the CDM working group, so they will present the overall objectives. We can if we want to, but I don't know that we'll have to. So things are thinking about are basically those that will help us, give us some direction in moving forward, and figuring out what we can get done in sort of our first year. For example, I think a good objective would be defining some use cases that will use to help us sort of test what we're doing and maybe define early questionnaires or surveys or specific questions within surveys that we want to get mapped. And so several of you have mentioned, being able to use this data with EHR data. I think those types of use cases would be helpful. Some things that have already been described, Brandy, we're even talking about your work process and how you want to build on that could be example of use cases. I think all of us probably have some use cases in mind from our own study as to what we'd like to be able to do with the survey data. So I think that's something that maybe we could think about between now and the next time we meet, and then propose some use cases or propose developing use cases, and then have some ones that we could suggest that we start work on and further develop. So that's one example I can think of an objective. I think we also want to think about where to go from what's been here. So we're hearing bits and pieces about what other groups have done. Again, I think we need more information, but what can we do with what all of us has already done in biobank and build out from there? So I will pause with my thoughts and see if there are other things you've been thinking about since we first started talking about meeting.
I put this in the chat, but you probably can't see when you're sharing your screen. I know I struggle to juggle the chat and screen share. You sort of touched on this, but some kind of a landscape analysis or just survey, not our kind of survey, landscape survey of what is available already. Who's done this? What have they done? How have they done it? And what could they bring to the table? Because I know that all of us is not the only cohort that has done something like this or entity. And I think just understanding what's out there would be a good first step. And then eventually, not necessarily for the first year, something like a best practices guide for cohorts who want to do this is, I think, what we should be aiming for.
Terrific. Thank you for phrasing that so nicely and putting it in the chat. And like I said, I'll update the notes when I have a chance when I'm not trying to think and write at the same time. But I appreciate that. Those are good goals.
Nicole, I had two other thoughts that came to mind, and I'm very happy to see defined use cases. on the initial list. I think that's essential. And I agree with the landscape analysis too. Related to kind of the best practices, wonder if the use case could go even one step further, and one of our OKRs could be to articulate what the end result looks like, kind of the value proposition for a cohort. And then related to that are two others, and I'm throwing these out just for ideas, not necessarily saying that we need to have 6, 7, or 8 OKRs. But because so much of this is going to, it's going to require visibility and collaboration with things. One early OKR could be to just identify the platform and the environment where this working group does its work and keeps its information. And related to that, to think about kind of not just a best practices, but almost from the beginning, sort of a how to get started. And I'm thinking about definitions, and a lot of the things that we've talked about are going to be very familiar to all of us crew. For other cohorts that are just starting, everything, the vocabulary, the technology, the process is going to be brand new. So I think one OKR that focuses on kind of taking cohorts or cohort staff or study investigators from the very beginning. What's a common data model? Why would you use it? And kind of walks people through kind of a training session of, in addition to the value add, how do you get started and not feel overwhelmed?
I think that's a good question for all of us. So, because it's definitely an overwhelming proposition. And again, maybe more of a best practices not this year, but I appreciate all those. A platform was definitely on my list to put up there as action items. I think it's very important that, again, we have the transparency that we've talked about and documentation, and that we're sharing that with the larger community. So I was, like I said, I was going to put that on as an action item. I'm certainly happy to mention it now. Pretty much everything that Odyssey does is through GitHub as far as documentation. I think at this point, because most of our documentation is going to be minutes and video calls, I still think it makes sense to set up a GitHub. We can put the documentation information in wiki format, which is one of the tabs you can set up in a GitHub. Some of the question would be, do we want to try to get it under Odyssey, or do we just want it as a separate repository that they link to? I think either option is fine. If there's other ideas about a platform, we should talk about those as well, or like you said, maybe make it part of an OKR, is just getting our platform and our documentation established as a early. And it's nice to have some low-hanging fruit in the OKRs. We've got a bit of a challenge, so things that we can do and help us get started and, feel like progress are good items too. Anyone else?
Just want to backtrack a little bit to see sort of define a little bit more what is our main objective. So there are, and I agree, a landscape analysis would be nice to have, but right now we know, at least of these epidemiological studies that we are familiar with, there is at least all of us and Biobank, they already have their vocabularies, and they started, my understanding is, by just assigning concept ideas and then registering them at Athena. That's there might be others that have done these surveys, and the Connect, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, you've created concept ideas for the whole survey, but it have not been put through Athena, but there are all concepts that were for a specific survey. Now, other studies that were represented here, we have our own data dictionaries, and data has been accumulated through many years. So basically you would expect people will, is that a good practice? Everybody creating, is that what gives us more flexibility? Everybody creates their own concept ideas based on, rather than trying to map and then mapping them later on, so we get more of this sort of linked data. Is that the objective? Because is that what we're trying to do, is to because to do that, having the tools that facilitate that to the end user will be really critical, because even now, if you're trying to map to SNOMED, there are like so many, I forgot how many thousands and thousands of mappings are there, even for like the straightforward pathology report, which you would imagine it's relatively straightforward. That is already quite a lot of work to find, and there are already standards. I'm just trying to, now with the survey data is a lot more complex and a lot of many different ways of asking similar questions, even more than I think in a pathology report. It's a little bit more standardized. So I'm trying to understand sort of where are we going with that, because that would guide more our use cases, and so essentially a more of philosophical initial discussion about sort of, yeah, what are we going to do and what is the main objectives. I can see many different ways, but I still don't have clear this first. Maybe everybody else knows already has it much more clear than myself, and then maybe you can just say it. So where are we going with all of that? Because it's I find the standard world can be really helpful, but everybody creates their own standards, and then you have to like map them. And like there is this work that, as you know, Jaya from our from the NCI group is trying to use large language models for that mapping. And that's just one example of tools. Is that one of the objectives, to actually work with the use cases that we have now and come up with those tools that are going to really facilitate that, or keep creating more standards? I don't know. Maybe you can shed some light on my confusion of where's the place to start.
Yeah, I don't think you're confused. I think this is kind of where we are, is trying to figure out where to get started. And I think what Jim was saying too about, thinking about what is our endpoint, maybe working backwards. Like, what is it we want to be able to do at the end of this, and then go work backwards and define those steps. And, there are a lot of tools available, through Odyssey that help with mapping when there are things to map to, but not necessarily in the space we're trying to work in now. And again, this might be something, Brandy, you're more equipped to talk about in terms of what's available, or maybe what Odysseus does as part of their process when working with you. And again, this could be, we probably have a whole meeting just focusing on what all of us process has been. And maybe Michael talking more about like your experience with Biobank, and again, doing this landscape survey, and maybe inviting some others to hear about what their processes are. So I would say it's not so much that we need the answer now, but I think defining that answer is part of what we want to set up as one of the objectives.
I was going to say, I feel like maybe all of us is unique in this setting, because it sounds like the main objective of the work group is really to provide some best practices for how to transform local data to the OMOP model, not necessarily get that vocabulary added to OMOP itself. I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding that, but if it's locally, is it locally to transform so that everybody's leveraging a common data model, or is it to?
It's both. I think we definitely want to build the vocabulary, because that seems to be a stopping block, and from what I've seen, a lot of what other groups come up against is, you'll have, let's say, a range of age ranges that are an option for an answer to question. And, the LOIC's vocabulary will have some of them, and SNOMED will have some of them, but nobody has all of them. And so it's kind of trying to figure out, like, do we have a survey specific vocabulary? Do we have one that's a mix? So if you need LOINC, SNOMED, all of us, and two other options to actually complete the like highest resolution list for a question, then, can we create a vocabulary that's sort of a cobble of what exists, but also what we really need to be able to map at the resolution we have. My understanding that I hear a lot is that you're forced to roll up because there aren't all the possible options when you're trying to map to what's already there. And ideally, where possible, you want to maintain resolution and only roll up if you're mapping to another survey that doesn't have all the options that you have. So I think it's both. I think it's helping increase the vocabulary to meet our needs, but then also helping with the use of that vocabulary. James, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, thank you. Everything you said right now is spot on, and I think that can also the anecdote of what you just said, I think can help inform the OKRs. Because as I listened to what you were saying, and I thought of Tamara, your comment, harmonization between cohorts. That to me seems like one of the key end goals, because that's what everyone's looking for, and that's what's going to make cohorts' lives easier. Nicole, a lot of the terms that you just used would fall on deaf ears for most cohorts. And, things like building a vocabulary, mapping the resolution, we understand those here, but I think for cohorts who are new to this, it's going to be one of those things that just kind of a barrier. And so I think as we develop the OKRs, thinking about kind of what's the brand new cohort that's thinking about this, the naive cohort user, and I use naive in a literal sense, not a judging sense. What are they going to need to harmonize their data with someone else to make it easier for their data to be reused? And I think that we as a group can almost have two sets of conversations. One is very much focused on what the end users are going to do. We know who's our audience of cohorts that want to commit, or those data managers who want to convince their PIs, yes, we need to start using OMOP because it'll make all of our lives downstream easier. That conversation of sort of who those targets are, and then the much more technical nuance meeting, which you just articulated there. And I'm not sure how to find the right balance. It'll take some time, but to me, that's one of the key challenges.
Thank you, Jim. I think one of the things we might be able to do is maybe not so much focus on OKRs for this year, but OKRs in general, like what we want to accomplish as a group, and then start breaking those down to what makes sense to tackle first. And again, kind of figuring out what our endpoint is and working backwards from there to what steps are needed to accomplish it. And we're almost at the end. So I do want to talk about action items, but Monse, I saw your hand go up. So
yeah, just a quick comment that I think observing what has been done so far is very telling, because there's a reason why each cohort has created their own concept. It's because it's really, it takes you a lot of flexibility if you are trying to design a questionnaire and mapping, unless you reuse modules from somebody else, and then you use exactly, the connect module on something. You use exactly that, then you have the same questions. So I think observing more what has happened so far is going to be very informative. My intuition is that that's going to keep happening, and the main thing is sort of doing the post, getting really powerful tools to map across people, and then have a demonstration of why that's easier than to reharmonize the data all the time, and having a use case. And I think that's how other cohorts might end up buying it. But I see it's more of a, you cannot force people to any standards, but I think it's more like the pause. But anyways, that's, as you're saying, one of the objectives, to figure that out. But observing what has happened so far would be really, really helpful for us to be realistic.
Yes.
Tend to evolve. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely realistic is always one of the challenges. Like we have, ideal, but we have to figure out what we can get there, what's most useful earliest. So I really appreciate this. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate all of your interest and expertise that you're bringing to the table. I did want to just round out with a few action items. I will go back through our transcript and meeting and put together some minutes for us and share those out. Mike had mentioned early on maybe setting up a standard meeting time. I think that would be very helpful. If this is generally a good time, we could do that and then see. We had two members, Britton and Kayan, who couldn't make it today. So we'll see if that's always going to be a problem or if they might be able to make it in the future. I propose a cadence of twice a month. I feel like that's our best chance to like hopefully not be overwhelming, but keep us moving things forward. Does that sound good to the group? So yeah, so unfortunately I can't see you, but Muncie nodded yes. So hopefully that's
We
Yeah,
nodded yes
sounds
as well from our future health.
okay. Thank you. So yes, and is this time generally good for everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so,
Right.
yeah.
So I'll
Yeah.
work on getting that scheduled. I'll check in with Brittany and KN and see if they would be able to make that in the future. The other thing I would like to do is go ahead. We can discuss more about how, but I would like to get us a GitHub site set up as soon as possible so that we have a place to share the notes and the recordings and start our documentation. Because right now, I guess I could share these in the Teams meeting, so that automatically creates files and folders that we can now all share. But I think it would be good to get it out into GitHub. And I can talk to Claire about if we can make it part of the larger OMA organization, or if there's a preference for how we do that. And then the other one I propose is basically just continuing what we've started. So if you'll sort of think more about our discussion and talking with your groups, and maybe start thinking about use cases or end products that we could look at to kind of start defining our OKRs. I don't expect this is something that we're going to have done in like 2 meetings. I think it's good to discuss, or even discussing and resolving some of these things could be part of the OKR itself. Like defining use cases can be an OKR, and then the outcome is, citing how many use cases we want to use, what are the parameters around those use cases as a key result, and how will that use case help us get to our endpoint. So I want to be respectful from everybody's time, and we are out at time. I will get the minutes out this week, hopefully this afternoon. Anything else anybody wants to add before we close for today?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again. I appreciate everyone's interest and experience, and I will get us scheduled for a standard meeting in 2 weeks.
And
Thanks,
thank you,
everyone.
Nicole, for organizing.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, you're
Thanks, everyone.
welcome. I'm
Thanks, Nicole.
so excited we're doing this. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.